I got a message from Ben Fenton on Instagram, and just kind of like randomly, like he's like hit me up a couple of times, like um once when I was in Vancouver, he was like inviting me to come check his shop out, and I didn't manage to do it or whatever. But I like, I've never really like hung out with him. It's just like he sent me some like nice messages and stuff. And he was telling me that like him and Victor had had a conversation, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And he mentioned something about like, Victor being inspired by what he was doing with the rock climbing, and I was like, oh, cool, but I didn't really like know what that was. And then the next day, Victor sent me, he was like, oh, do you know this podcast? And it was the one you did with Joel. And I was kind of surprised because like I know Joel a little bit just from like mutual friends and stuff. And I was like, I wonder why Victor's like sending this to me. And then I listened to it and I thought like I was just like I really liked the podcast and like the sort of stuff that you guys were talking about in that episode was just a lot of different things that had kind of like been on my mind, and I was like, oh damn, this is really cool. And then Victor was like, oh yeah, this is my friend, like, would you be open to like, maybe, he's like, I was thinking maybe this would be cool for you to do. And I was like, oh crazy. I was like, I don't know, I don't really think of myself as someone that would like anyone would want to hear on a podcast or whatever, but I was like, yeah, that was really cool. I'm like super open to that. And then I guess from having heard that, I wanted to listen to more. So then I listened to Ben's episode next, and like I think just like everything he was talking about with the stuff he does with his like climbing stuff and like those his like I don't even really know how to like refer to it. Like I guess like the community side of what he's doing with all of that. It was just kind of like it was really in line with a lot of things that I've been thinking about, and I thought that was like really inspiring. And I know like Victor's been wanting to do something similar, and it was all this like I don't know, it's like this all these things that have kind of been on my mind were like being talked about in your podcast, and I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Like it was like a conversation that I was like wanting to have with somebody was like happening or whatever. So that was kind of what I was referring to.
Incredible. I was telling you before I hit record that I couldn't really assess when things started kind of picking up, but it actually would have been with Ben's episode. And I know I re-released it the other day, but the first, like, he was episode 100, and that one opened every door for me. And I think that's for sure what made, like, I mean, Joel would be a great example. I think, like, once he saw a friend of his had done it, he was more open to doing it. So Ben's episode has like the gift that keeps on giving. People always like almost, I don't know, maybe 90% of people who I meet for the first time under the pretense of like doing this thing, they reference that they either started with his episode or pretty quickly made it back to his episode.
Right, right. That's cool. I mean, it was quite an inspiring conversation. I was like, I really enjoyed listening to it.
He is so good at explaining everything he's doing. Like, if you look at what he's up to, like, the visuals are incredible. Like, if you were to have it not explained in context, you would think it was cool, but him being able to articulate why he's doing what he's doing and like how he came to be doing that, I think again, like, it's always, I was telling you, the guest that matters. Is It's not my part of the conversation, but his contribution to our talk, I think, was very inspirational for not only me, but I think a lot of other people too, because I always hear, and I think probably until this is over, people are gonna reference that episode, and that I mean, means a lot to me. So I like hearing that that was kind of where you started all this. And Joel, of course, amazing. If you can handle the F word, you're gonna love Joel's.
I didn't that didn't even really stick out to me too much, but yeah, both of those were so good. I think both of those guys are very articulate about, what it is they're trying to do. And I didn't really like realize what any of that was because I'm sort of like new to using Instagram and stuff. And I looked at Ben's Instagram and kind of like what you were saying, I was like, oh, I can tell he's got some shit going on, but I didn't really know what it was or whatever. But yeah, he explained it all perfectly. And I didn't even really like same with Joel, like I could tell he was like doing a bunch of stuff, but I didn't really know what it was either. So it was really inspiring to hear more about all of that.
No, I love when kind of what you're talking about happens to me. Like when I'm thinking about something, when I have a thought or a line of thought like kind of percolating in my head, and then I hear like a podcast or read an interview about it or see a movie even loosely like about that thing, it like just amplifies it a million times in my head. And then I'm like, this movie was made for me. I think like I was just thinking about this 3 days ago. That's insane that this exists. So it hasn't happened to me that recently, but I'm envious that you had something kind of dive deeper into stuff you were already thinking about.
Yeah, no, I had that experience big time. I think it's like that whole conversation because I think like what a lot of stuff that they're doing is part of a reaction to kind of like growing up skateboarding and you guys were talking a lot about like that gatekeeping side of skateboarding and just like subcultures in general and how that like how do you reckon with that and like when you want things to be really welcoming but like you also kind of see the um I don't know like I don't even know how to like refer to it but it's like I've just been like thinking about a lot of that stuff kind of for like a couple of years now like I almost feel like the experience of like growing up skateboarding kind of like shapes you in a particular way that there's aspects of it that you need to like grow out of or something and it's taken me a long time to kind of like get there.
Yeah, that might be like I mean a moving target or like a never ending struggle trying to grow out of it or not grow out of it but adapt from it. But I mean that's a good like kind of a guiding light to have, right? Always aspiring to like maybe learn from some stuff you have done and then what you can use that as going forward.
Yeah. I mean, actually, like when I like in Ben's episode, I think he said it really well. Something about skateboarding being like the most welcoming, but also the most like judgmental community that he's ever like experienced. And um, I think that does like that impacts people psychologically, that like live that.
Definitely. And like for sure people who did it like years ago, it's a bit of a different sport now and maybe kids
Yeah.
or young people starting now might not fully understand like exactly the reference, but skating even like 10, 20, 30 years ago, way different.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a good thing that skateboarding is not really like that anymore, but that's very much how I experienced it.
So I guess see, I've so many things that I really want to learn about you, and I don't know like in what order I'm gonna ask all this, but I guess like I'll just kind of go based on what you're saying. So maybe I'll ask kind of about like growing up and about the skate scene, if you don't mind. Like when did skateboarding become your thing? Actually, yeah, sorry, let me you grew up like you were born and raised in Vancouver, right?
Well, I was born in Victoria, and then but I moved to like suburbs of Vancouver when I was like 4. So yeah, pretty much. I grew up in Maple Ridge, which is like an hour drive from Vancouver. That's where I like started skating.
And then like how old were you when you I guess when you decided you were gonna be a skater? How old were you?
Dude, I started skating when I was like 8. Like I think like for real. I mean, it was weird, man. I've always kind of like, that my mom has pictures of me as like a toddler with a skateboard that she got from a garage sale or something. But like, I think I actually went to a skate shop and like picked the board out when I was for my 8th birthday. I like remember the board and everything.
Do you remember what inspired that? Like what did you see that made you want to do that too?
Yeah, I don't know. I think like just like at that point, it's not like it skateboarding wasn't something that was like in popular culture. Like you rarely encountered it. Like I'd literally just seen like a couple older kids like skating in the parking lot, and it was very magnetic to me. Like everything about it was just had like an allure. And I guess yeah, at that time, like this is like, early 90s, it had that kind of like outcast quality to it. So that was all like very intriguing. So yeah, all of that stuff captured my imagination in a pretty like strong way. So it was like, um, yeah, it was pretty deep rooted from the beginning.
I love asking someone with a bit of history of that type of thing because if you asked someone new, like, I'll ask my brother's kids how they got into skating and they would think I was a boomer and they would think, well, what do you mean we saw a TikTok of it and we wanted to do
Yeah,
it? But it's cool when people have that actual reference. Like someone's older brother used to like skate the mani pad at Safeway or something. I like that way more.
it would have been that. Like, it would have been like, I saw like a waxed curb at like the hockey rink. And then I was like, you know what I mean? And then one day I saw somebody like skating there. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, it's like I'd never seen somebody like I didn't know that you could do an ollie and shit. And like, I'd been skating for a while before I ever saw a video and like, saw like a 360 flip or something. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, yeah, it was very like inaccessible when I started doing it. I didn't know anything about it.
I think back to times like that and I get so almost jealous of myself because I remember like when I was a kid and I found out about skateboarding, dude, there wasn't even that much to it. I just saw it somewhere and then decided like I'm gonna do that. Especially like you were saying, it wasn't that like it wasn't like it is now. So it was almost. I had cool parents that were supportive of whatever I was doing, but like most parents didn't even want their kids skateboarding. It was like a very negative thing. But seeing it, I was so into it that I decided I was gonna spend, I mean, arguably the rest of my life being into that type of thing. And there hasn't been anything in my life recently that I've felt that passionate about or had to learn that much about.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there will be ever again, really. I think back to those days for me as like, if I could get into anything as hard as I got into that back then, I would love it, but I don't know if it's possible. And I'm rambling and interrupting you. So you started skating when you were 8.
Yeah, no, but I relate to everything you're saying, like just that obsession and even the way that I came across it, like yeah, it's almost something that like you have to like recover from or some shit when you can't really like do it the way you used to. But yeah, I guess I just had a fascination, and then I don't know. I think like I was so young. I didn't really I didn't know anybody that like did it. I think I was like, I don't even know what grade I would have been in, like grade like 3 or 4 or something. Like I barely even like had friends, and I knew like one other kid at my elementary school. I think maybe I knew that he had like a ramp or something. And this was Jordan Hoffart. You know him?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. The name very familiar.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I like maybe just from me walking around the neighborhood, I like noticed that he had like a quarter pipe or something. And like similarly, it just like I something like that. I just be like, what is going on over there or whatever. And then I think like I don't even remember what it was, but I can't remember if we were friends before I got that my first board. But when I did, like I remember we went skating and I was like, yeah, I didn't know what you're supposed to do with it. Like I just like other than stand on it. And I remember we like went down to my elementary school and there was these blocks that you could like we were like, oh, like I guess we could like roll off this or something. And we just like learned how to like roll off like a block that was like a foot off the ground or whatever. And then that was it, like from there on. And then I could already kind of there was like 2 blocks. And like already the wheels were spinning. I was like, oh damn, I could see that if you like go off the small one, then you can go off the big one. And then I was like, maybe one day you could like go over both or whatever. And I think that was kind of like that put that like that obsession just like from there on out just kind of like snowballed. But yeah, we didn't have shit to skate.
When did you start meeting like other people who were into this too? Because I know, like, especially back then, that everyone found each other somehow. Like, like everyone, it was like a magnet. Like, skaters would find skaters even back then with less or no like ways, no social media or however people find each other these days. So when did you start like having a squad to skate with or friends in the community at least?
Yeah, I mean, like it was just us two for a while, and like they like where we lived, there was nothing to skate. Like this is just like suburban Canada. It's just like fucking the best thing would have been like a curb cut on the sidewalk or whatever. And we skated like that for like a while. And then I don't know if it was like maybe a year after I'd been skating, I found out that there was a skate park that opened up in the summertime when the ice rink was shut down. There was like a dude that built ramps and put them in the ice rink. And that actually ended up, I don't know if you heard of New Line Skate Parks. Like they build like most of the skate parks in Canada and I think like, globally or whatever. But this dude Kyle that started New Line, I think that was like the first thing he did was he'd like build wooden ramps and put them in the hockey rink in the summertime. And it was just this like community center. And it was called the neutral zone. And there's like, youth workers there. And basically they'd set it up in the afternoon and you could like go and skate. And I think there was, they might have had like a ping pong table there or whatever. But um that's when I started like encountering other kids. And it definitely was that kind of like had that like misfit sort of like thing going on. Like I remember um like all the other kids that I was meeting, I was like, like one of them, his name was like Lil G. And like, I don't know, it was like naughty, like there was and that just kind of like fed into all the like intrigue around it all, and that's when I started like kind of seeing like the older dudes that were good and like, getting pulled into that whole side of it.
I know exactly what you mean. When I think of skating back then, I just have a vision of like one of the scenes in like the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles where they're all like
Dude, it was like that. Yeah, like the layer. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, dude, it was like that.
Splinter had all the like bad kids, and yeah, it was always skateboarding and graffiti. They would have in movies to like depict like the derelict kids, which I guess isn't far off sometimes. But yeah, I think of the layer.
it wasn't really far off, like from my experience with it. Like, and that's when, it's like, because I was so young, it was like I needed an excuse to kind of like, not be at home or whatever. And then like, I'd just be there from, I don't know, I think it was like 3 p.m. until like 9 at night or something. And it'd just be like, you know, older kids drinking, smoking weed, stuff like that, getting exposed to that quite young. And then, and then I remember like the first time I went to like an actual skate park that didn't have like the youth workers and stuff. Like I remember this kid there just like before I even like I was just walking up, he just came up to me and just punched me in the face like unprovoked. And that was like my first experience of like being at a skate park. So that was always kind of like all of that shit. That's like what skateboarding felt like at the time.
I mean, terrible, terrible. You had to be punched in the face, but you'll never forget that.
Yeah, and also it's like, I kind of like romanticize that side of it too, because it's like I don't know, there was all that like hazing around it, and you kind of had to like really want it to, break through the barrier of like being around it. So, like that stuff, I kind of have like a dysfunctional kind of like value for that sort of behavior.
Yeah, I definitely I think about that too, and I think maybe it may be good the world moved past all that, but also maybe a bit of it might be useful for some of the new generation. I don't want to get in trouble for.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's like, and I guess that's what all that kind of relates to like those conversations that I was referring to earlier is like, yeah, like yeah, I don't really know what to make of it, because I think it's those sort of experience that kind of shaped all the people that I'm like closest to and like so much stuff that I admire, but it's also like super whack too.
What did your parents think of you like becoming a skater and hanging out at this place?
I mean, it's funny because I like, I guess that's just another thing about that point in time. Like, I don't think they just didn't know what we were doing. And it's like, and skateboarding is the perfect kind of like they have no idea what I'm up to. Like I could be like, yeah, I'm going skating. That could mean anything. And like that at what like pretty soon it did. Like they had no idea. They thought I was like down at the local elementary school, but I was like hopping on a bus and going downtown and like, you know, meeting like kids from the city and like going to the skate park like 2 hours away and shit like that. And it's like nobody had phones. I just had to like make sure that I like made it back home, which in hindsight, I'm like, I don't even know how I did that really, but it was yeah, it was pretty mad. I don't think my parents really like clocked what I was up to that much, which was funny because my dad was a cop and he was like a detective. And I don't like I mean maybe they were like knew exactly what I was doing and then I was just like naive and they were like cool about it. But yeah, I don't know. It was a funny experience.
That could be it because I constantly have said like my parents had no idea what I was up to, but then if I ask my mom, she was like, "Oh, I knew it for sure. I knew exactly what you were doing. Like I knew that backpack was full of spray paint and a 40, but like
Yeah,
whatever."
yeah, no, I'm sure you're probably right. Yeah.
And then I keep interrupting you. I feel it's throwing the story up. What I asked, like when it went from just you to more, and
Oh,
then
right. And then yeah, I guess it was like I feel like back then it was like all the skate like there weren't many skate parks and stuff like that. So all the skate shit was kind of like at a community center or something like that. And kind of like when my world kind of like really expanded around all that stuff was that dude Kyle that built the skate park. He was like invited us to come into the city to some like it was actually a meeting about when they were going to build like the Vancouver Skate Plaza, but this was like years before it ever got built. And there was this community center called Douglas Park in Vancouver, just off Canby Street. And it was a similar thing where there was like they had a few ramps there that they would bring out on like a Friday night or whatever. But there was also these like two those like recycled benches that are like really good for skating. And like for some reason they were like unusually low to the ground. And we that's like where this meeting was. And me and Jordan, we went there, and there was like these other kids our age, and that was the first time I kind of like seen kids from the city or whatever. And it was like, we'd been skating for a bit at that point, so I was like, we could do some tricks, and it was like, you're kind of like sizing each other up or whatever. And then um we ended up starting to talk to those kids, and then like one of them is who ended up being like, to this day, like my closest friend Pryce. And I remember starting to talk to him, and like he was talking about like being in New York City and the Brooklyn banks and shit. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? Like, you've been to New York? And is because his dad lived in New York and his mom lived in Vancouver. So he would like, he'd split his time between the two. And I remember just being like so fascinated to like talk to some kid who'd like been to New York. And I guess at that point I kind of like, or no, I didn't like clock it at the time, but I guess that just opened up my horizons of understanding like, what's possible. Because before that I just had this really confined sort of like suburban existence, that like the extent of it was like, the ramps and the hockey rink or whatever.
That like even now, like as an adult, when I meet someone who's lived a life in New York, that kind of amazes me, and I'm super impressed about this person. I can't imagine like being a kid just learning about all this and then meeting someone who was half in Van, half in New York. Like I wouldn't have been able to process that at that time.
Yeah, I couldn't really process it. Like, I don't know, I guess we were like 12 or 13 or something. And then like, um, I guess not too long after that, it was maybe like the second time I'd been to Slam City Jam in Vancouver. And I ran into Price again, because it's like, you don't have phones. I don't know how like you stay in contact with like kids that live an hour away from you or whatever. And I just bumped into him. And then he was like, yo, you can stay at my mom's house like this weekend if you want to just hang out in the city. And that was like a fucking dream for me at that point. And then from then on, I just kind of like fell in with that group of friends, and they all lived around Douglas Park, and that was kind of like our crew growing up. It all kind of like revolved around that place. Um and then I guess just from like being friends with Price, then maybe I don't remember how long it was, but we went to New York one summer and stayed with his dad. And that was like insane, because this was like pre 9/11, and you could just skate around like Midtown, no security. And just like we'd go skating all night, like literally like go out in at like 8 p.m. and come home at like 6 in the morning, having just like skated everywhere. It was just like mind blowing. But yeah, I owe it all to Price really for kind of like uh getting me out of the burbs.
So then what is your like did you eventually move into the city of Van, or did you, because I know your trajectory is like BC to New York to London, right?
Yeah, well, I never really like lived in New York, but yeah, I guess like backtracking. So after I met like my group of friends that lived in Van, this was when I was like in my early teens. I kind of just every weekend I'd just be out there crashing at like one of their parents' house. And that's sort of like that kind of changed my whole like social dynamic and my experience of the world. And then I was pretty from that point on, I was like, the first chance I get, I'm getting the fuck out of where I grew up. And back to Price again, I moved as soon as I finished high school. I moved in. He was a year behind me in school, so he was still in grade 12 or whatever. But I moved in with him and his mom. They had a spare room, and I lived like with Price for a year in Van, and then basically like lived in Vancouver for the next like 3 or 4 years, with a little like hiatus of moving to White Rock, which is another suburb. I ran a skate shop with my friend Bradley. And then I moved to Montreal after that, which is when I started spending like more time in New York because it was just like a Greyhound bus ride away or whatever. And that was kind of like that whole period of time.
My fault. For some reason, I thought you had actually like resided in New York, but I also didn't know about Montreal at all. How long were you there?
I mean, I guess like I was trying to like be in New York as much as possible, and that's probably why like, Montreal was the closest I could get to it. So I was like, yeah, I moved to Montreal, I guess like under the guise of going to school, but it was really just, probably because I wanted just an ex I didn't really know how to like make moves or whatever. So, yeah, I was in Montreal from like 2009 to like 2011, and pretty much every chance I got, I'd just be like, jump on the Greyhound, go to New York, stay with Pryce or like whoever would let me like crash on their couch. And then I guess around that time of like those trips to New York, that was like a whole other sort of like world opened up as well. But yeah, I was never like, I guess there have been times since then where I've spent like extended periods where I'd have an apartment or something because of work. But at that point, I was just fully like couch surfing. But it could be for like, months at a time or whatever.
So before we recorded, I was telling you how cold it was where I am, and you had said you only experienced it a couple times, but you must have had many freezing days in Montreal.
Yeah, yeah. I guess those like couple years in Montreal, I like I know what's up with it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because I think people compare our winter. I've been to Montreal, but only in the summer. But everyone says it's pretty harsh. Winters might be getting better with the world ending with global warming and stuff, but I think it's still pretty bad, pretty cold, lots of snow.
Yeah, yeah, but I guess it's like it's also kind of like sunny a lot, which is different from what my experience of being around Vancouver and stuff. So it's cold as fuck, but the sun's out a lot, and I think psychologically maybe it's like felt a bit less oppressive. But yeah, I did that's kind of where I'd have those experiences of, like mask on, like dealing with the cold.
When did you go? Like when was the move to London?
That was I guess I moved to London in 2012, and that was off the back of one of those kind of like extended kind of just like bumming around in New York periods, which I wasn't living in Montreal at that time, but um I'd like just moved back to Vancouver after I'd lived in Copenhagen for like 6 months. And I was like just finished school, and like, my reaction to kind of like finishing school was like, fuck it, I just want to skate and like work in a warehouse. And like right after that, I was like just back in Vancouver, but there was like a skate trip to Montreal that I went on, and then I just kind of like uh I stayed on and just like crashed at a friend's house in New York for like another month or whatever. And on that trip when I was in New York, um for some reason there was just like a bunch of British people there. I think it was like Halloween, and like there was just this massive crew of people from London. And I literally just kind of like met this group of dudes in the street skating through my friend Rob. He was hanging out with Danny Brady, and I remember I'd like been out on Halloween, and I was just kind of like wandering around by myself the next day, and I bumped into them. And it was funny because I was like, it's funny looking back on it now because I was always a bit of like a Anglophile about like skateboarding and shit. Like I was like kind of a nerd about like British skateboarding because when I was young, I guess I got a copy of this video called First Broadcast. It was like back then, it's like I would just kind of buy whatever VHS the skate shop happened to have. And it was like this, it was kind of like a one of those video, it was like a scene video that had like multiple companies, whatever. And I remember Brady had a part in it and he was like the same age as me. And I remember really tripping on that, being like, damn, who are these kids like in London ripping or whatever? And since then I was always kind of like a fan. So when I bumped into him in the street in London, I was like, oh, what the fuck? That's like Danny Brady. And like I was like, oh, my friend knows him or whatever. And then we just ended up going skating. And then Brady was there with, all these guys who are like my closest friends now, um, from London, but they were just there like partying and skating or whatever. And yeah, we just kind of became fast friends from like doing that, like going skating all day and partying all night. And it was a pretty you know, bonding experience. And that turned out to be like Lev and Stuart and like all my friends from Palace, and I didn't really like clock who they were when I met them.
Was that I should know my dates better. But like, did Palace exist at that point, or was it like just being started?
Oh yeah, I guess that's like the funny part too, is because that previous skate trip I was on when I was in Montreal. I remember meeting Chewy on that when I was on that trip because he was there for like something else, like an Adidas trip or something. And I remember like because yeah, Palace was around at that time, but it was like quite new and like similarly like this is like before Instagram and shit. It was like you didn't really know what something was apart from like seeing video clips. And I think they'd made like there was like a couple clips on the internet and I remember Palace really captured my imagination. So, and when I saw Chewy, I was like, oh shit. Like, I was like, I remember asking him for a sticker. And then this was like a couple weeks before I ended up meeting Lev. And I didn't really realize that Palace was Lev basically. And we'd been like kicking it and skating for a few days before I put that together. And on that trip, Lev showed me he just edited that video Trill from when they were like went on this skate trip in France. And I remember him showing me that and it like just totally blew my mind. Um so it's like, yeah, Palace was it was around, but it was still quite new. Like maybe I think Palace started in 2009. So at this point, it'd been around for like 2 years or something. And back then things didn't get around so quickly. So it was like shit going on in the UK or whatever still felt like a different world.
That I mean, crazy that you like saw it gonna become what it is now from the inside.
Yeah, totally. And like I said, I was a fan, so I was tripping when I was like, kind of got like accepted by those guys. It was like, um, yeah, it was a trip for sure.
Another another thing I'm super jealous of whenever I'm traveling, I wish that I did, I was like really inspired by something and just kept the trip going or like moved to the place that we traveled to. And I haven't done it yet, but I really love the fact that like you just met your friends and you're having such a good time that you just made it life.
Yeah, I kind of did that in like a major way, but yeah, at that time. But yeah, I kind of used to do that a lot. Like I would purposely like kind of never accumulate any possessions and live a a pretty like transient lifestyle. So if those opportunities ever presented themselves, I would just fucking like stay or whatever. Um, which has its pros and cons.
Yeah, maybe that's why I'll never do it because I never like preemptively set myself up to be able to do that. I have like a absurd amount of random collections and possessions. I can never just like uproot and go somewhere else. Maybe I should minimize the amount of stuff I have and make it more possible to do this type of thing.
Yeah, I don't know. Like in hindsight, I can see it was more of a kind of like dysfunctional side of my personality that I was so like unrooted and restless. But it was also fun too, and like um I've definitely had kind of like some of the best times of my life from being open to just letting those things like unfold or whatever. But yeah, I don't know, like in more recent years, I've kind of had to like reckon with like whatever was underlying that like restlessness, you know?
Yeah, I guess it definitely a two-way street, but
hmm
and then you've been in London since then. So like over 10 years.
Yeah, like I guess fuck it, it's coming up on like 14, like what, yeah, 2026. I moved there in like the beginning of 2012. Um, so yeah, pretty much 14 years now, which is mad.
And it's I mean from what I hear, it probably changed a lot like since you've been there. Like even though you're I mean there's people who have probably been there their whole life a lot longer, but you've probably seen it drastically change, like just every day, but also skating, also just Palace in general, like probably changed so much in those 12, 14 years.
Oh yeah, I mean, pretty like so many of those things almost kind of like it's unrecognizable. Um, but yeah, I guess just from me, like that's my only experience. Like I guess because as soon as I got there, all those changes started happening. So that's kind of like that's that's how I know it. That's kind of the way I see it is like changing all the time, you know?
Yeah, yeah. What's the saying? Like the only thing constant is change.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's trippy.
Yeah, it seems that like that isn't that long ago. It's only a few years, but when you're in it, it's a long time. And it feels like I was talking about 2010 the other day, like it was just happened, but then I had to think about it. That's like 15, 16 years ago. It's definitely hard for me to like wrap my head around stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess that's like, I don't know, your late 20s, like early 30s is when time kind of like starts warping a bit and years just fly by. Um, but it definitely doesn't feel like I've been in London for like the majority of my adult life, even though that's the case now.
And now that you're out there, like do you if you had to guess, like, will you be out there forever? I have friends like Victor is one of them. You move out there, and then there's no point in going anywhere else. Like you're already kind of in the promised land for everything. Have you thought about like moving home ever?
I mean, I don't know, like I do just feel super lucky that I ended up there and I think it's an amazing city and it kind of has like everything I ever wanted out of like, you know, life. So I don't, I mean, there's sides of like, I don't know. I just don't even, if like say if I move back to Canada, like I'd just be starting so fresh. I wouldn't even know where to begin. Like it's been so long now. I don't like know what I do there. And I think the things that like seem appealing about um living there are just so alien to me that it's yeah, I can't even like wrap my head around it. But yeah, at this point I'm like I'm pretty settled in London. Like um I've never really been good about like planning my future and shit. So it's but I don't see like an alternative at the moment.
Yeah, I guess like I was saying, London has probably changed a lot since you've been there, but Canada has also probably changed a lot without you being there. So going home would be even more different than like you've been away for long enough and enough has changed that it would be completely another shock to the system, like moving home.
Yeah, I think it would be like a big shock to the system, and I don't think I'd be I don't know, like a lot of most of my friends have moved away from Vancouver, or they're like, moved to the island, or just kind of like a more mellow lifestyle, which does appeal to me, but I'm also not really like, yeah, that would be like a big shock to the system at this point.
And then now, like I'm like I was saying, very curious to learn anything about you, but I really am curious about the boxing.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of like what you were saying earlier about like, it doesn't seem like you'd ever find that thing that you'd be as obsessive about as skating. And I never really like thought I would get that thing either. But I've like, I mean, boxing's kind of come pretty close for me, but then, I got into that in like my like mid 30s. So it's not really something I can like dive into the same way. But I do feel very lucky that I'm kind of like found that thing that kind of like um, you know, grabbed my attention in a similar way. Um,
And the foundation, like the very powerful foundation. I would like you to tell me all about it, please. I'm very curious. I've looked into it, but I don't want to like sit here and tell the person who owns it what it is accomplishing. So maybe if you could, in your own words, like tell me a bit about it and what you're like set out to do with it.
yeah, cool. I mean, I hope I can kind of like do this in a somewhat concise way. And I'm almost kind of curious what it appears like to you, because I've felt a bit like um I've struggled to kind of like put it into words what we're trying to do with it in the like, the few times that I've tried to kind of like get it out there. Um, but basically with that, it came about um mainly just from my friend Derek that I do it with. Like he was an acquaintance of mine. Um and I just kind of I knew I didn't really know what he did exactly. Like I knew he was some kind of like mental health professional, but I thought he was like a therapist or something. And he was like just checking in on me one time, and I was like, I guess I was talking about, like how I'm super lucky with how things have panned out for me with like my work life and stuff. But I think, just kind of like where things were at with like Palace and everything, it's kind of turned into like my job is basically like me working in fashion or something. And that's like not really where my heart's at. And he was telling me that like, what he does for a living is kind of help people kind of like figure out these like, if they're kind of struggling with having like meaning and fulfillment and these sort of like things going on. Um, and I've always kind of like that's always been a bit elusive for me. I'd never really known how to like engage with that stuff. So I was I was curious what that looked like to do work around that. And he told me that like the practice he his practice is called positive psychology. Um, and most of the work with positive psychology is kind of like helping people find like, you know, what figure out what makes them happy, which a lot of that comes down to like, meaning and purpose. Um, so doing I I started doing some work with him around that stuff, and he was asking me like if there was any opportunities like at work that I could kind of like do something more in line with my values. And at that time, there was conversations that had come up about um, this this space that's kind of like people know about now, this Manor Place thing that Palace has done with Nike, and all the conversations that we were having at work around that was all kind of about like community and like the opportunity to kind of like have this place that could kind of like act as I guess I was. my sort of like ideal vision of it would be like it kind of having this like community center vibe to it, which is kind of like going back to what I was talking about, the sort of like skate ramps and the ice rink type of thing. Like the way I grew up skating, that kind of environment is sort of like where my head went. Um, and I guess I'm like lucky that I have a degree of like influence of what goes on at work and stuff. And I started just kind of like thinking about what it would look like if this place, did have that like community center vibe to it. So when I was having these sessions with my friend Derek, I was just kind of coming to him with these ideas about that. And I guess he thought I was on to something with like what I was thinking, and um he got inspired to be involved. And I think like where he was coming from was like, I think you guys could do something really meaningful with this space, but if you want to be basically kind of engaging with the public and doing something where you know I think a lot of the ideas I had were the kind of like how can we offer this place to more like underserved communities, um and really make it like welcoming. And I think for us, just being like a skateboarding brand, it's not like we have the experience to really know how to do that in a meaningful way. Like we have we did have a skate park like years ago, and that was really cool, but there's only like so much that like opening the doors to a skate park can do as far as like attracting people or like bringing people into that space that might not otherwise like find it on their own. So we kind of came up with this idea is like if we work together that we could kind of like offer a program based on the work that he does, which I'd kind of had this really like profound experience with. And we could kind of like put that in a context that made sense for like doing it out of this like this palace space. Um, I mean, sorry, it kind of takes me a long time to explain what this whole thing's about. Should I just keep rambling or?
Yeah, no, no, it's awesome. You're doing a great job so far. Please, like as much as you need to ramble, ramble.
Okay, all right, I'll just keep rambling. Um, so basically, like the idea that we came up with was this positive psychology stuff. It's kind of like from what I know about it, it's like a relatively new kind of like academic discipline or like way or like field of psychology where like traditional psychology is more about like identifying like the pathology or the problem and then like how you treat that, where this is like all about kind of just like understanding what people's strengths are and then kind of like helping them figure out like what they've got going on and how they can use that to basically like make their life more meaningful and happy. And from what I know about the field is it's kind of been co-opted in more of like a corporate setting and kind of like CEOs like bossing up type shit. And it's usually like super expensive and it's not something that's like, offered through like public health services or anything like that. And I'd had this experience with it where it really gave me like a big shift in my perspective. And also like my friend Derek that I do it with, he'd had the same experience because he'd spent, like 30 years working in the charity field. And he reached a point of just kind of like burning out because he really wanted to be working with people in a hands-on way, but his like career trajectory kind of led to different like more management positions and stuff like that. And it's just not where his heart was at. And someone put him onto the positive psychology because they thought it could be helpful for him. And I think both of us sort of approached it with a degree of skepticism because I don't know, like for whatever reason, I guess like this idea of like coaching or whatever, I always sort of like bristled at that. Um, probably from my like skateboarding background, and it's like it's kind of like anti like organization or like even the idea of training and all this shit is just like frowned upon. And I think, maybe because stuff like life coaching is kind of this like unregulated world where there's like a lot of um snake oil salesmen and stuff. I was just like distrustful of it. But I did trust my friend and I had a lot of respect for him. And I figured like, if he backed doing this type of work that I was open to it. And I think when he was introduced to it, he had similar feelings, but we both had a really good experience of doing this type of work. And we thought that there was like a pretty big gap in um people having access to it. So what we wanted to do was to like I basically wanted to enable him to like do what he does on on a bigger scale and make it more accessible to people. And he had done some pilots of kind of like doing the type of work he does in like a workshop setting, with like groups of people up to like 12 or so. And then what we thought is if we kind of like figured out how to take his work and then use some sort of like context for it that is basically kind of like a lived could be like a lived out example of like a lot of the concepts that we'd be talking about in the workshops, that could be like a really effective way of delivering it. And I thought a way that I could kind of like angle it so it made sense of doing it in the environment of this new space that was being talked about at work. It's kind of like me figuring out or like me reflecting on what I think all the really like beautiful parts of like that growing up skateboarding experience and the type of people you meet and the different directions it can like lead you, kind of sharing that experience combined with like the positive psychology. I thought that could be a really uh, powerful um a powerful way of delivering it. And then I thought that way it could be a good way of linking it with Palace and kind of making it make sense for like how why we might be offering it like as with some affiliation to the brand or whatever. So I pitched the idea to my bosses and God bless them, they've always been super supportive um with me, and they agreed to like finance us running a pilot of the course to like see how it went. And we did that about a year, or no, this is like, man, this is almost like 2 years ago now that we did the first pilot for it. And it went really well. And yeah, kind of since then, we've just been doing like lots of groundwork to kind of get it where it is now. And it's still this thing that I like, I don't even know how long I've been talking about it now, but I sort of need some time to like explain it to people and I need to get better with the elevator pitch. But um, hopefully, what I'm explaining, I'll be able to kind of like show people what that looks like more soon.
I mean, like, I know what it's like to try to explain something, and always in my head, I don't think I'm explaining it right. I think that was like very, very informative and concise. I like fully understand what you're saying. That was great. I think, like you were asking before, what I think, like what I perceive it as, I would never have been able to explain it like that, but that is pretty similar to how I see it. Like just looking from the very far outside through social media, it looks like you're like using the foundation, using boxing to show all this stuff to new people who might not have found it on their own and might not have it like explained to them in this way as well. So I think like what you explain, I really appreciate you explaining it. That's also sort of how I see it from the outside. So it all adds up.
Okay, cool. I'm glad it kind of like comes off that way. But yeah, and I mean, I didn't even really talk about the boxing thing, but like, I guess basically, and the boxing thing came in as because that's kind of like, where what I'm like in the thick of right now. Whereas like what I was describing that first pilot we did, like I kind of had to angle it around like skating because that's the only way it made sense to kind of pitch it as a thing to be involved with like this space that's essentially a skate park. Um, but in doing so, that was like me, what I was saying earlier about me kind of having to grapple with all these things about like, what is it about skateboarding that I would like want to share with people. It's like it's not like so clear to me. But boxing, on the other hand, like I've had this really kind of like fresh experience with it where I don't have that like any of those jaded connotations, and it has been quite a like transformative thing for me. And that's something that I can like see is a lot easier as a way for me to kind of like share that with people and like connect with people. And also this like it ties in with the whole coaching side of thing, because that's kind of like what positive psychology is. It's not like therapy, like the practitioners of it are referred to as coaches. And I've developed this new sort of appreciation and admiration for like what a coach is. So I see like the boxing stuff fits in a lot like neater in my mind with like the ethos of what I'm trying to do with this whole thing. Um, but it's also like the way that we have designed the kind of like program side of this whole thing is we basically want the like positive psychology elements to be able to fit in with any sort of like physical activity or creative outlet that can be like an empowering tool for people, and figure out how to like share that in an accessible way. That's kind of like what we're trying to do with the whole thing. But then there's
So
all these other like, or sorry, what were you saying?
no, I was gonna ask you, like, moving forward in the future, is your goal to kind of like grow and encompass other activities under the umbrella of it all, and then just sort of have the positivity and the affirmations be like sort of able to be applied to any sort of sport, like the discipline of it all? Is that gonna go beyond boxing? Like maybe other people would introduce like other sports into it? Like, yeah, what's your the idea for how big you want this thing to be?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not even like specifically like a sport thing. So like say the way that we develop this like program side of it. And there's also like, it's branching out in unexpected ways, but like that this like program element of it, we wanted to do it that it could be like co-facilitated by like anyone who has a kind of like lived experience with, it could be sport, it could be art, it could be like, it kind of could be whatever, but like obviously you don't want to keep it like too broad because then it's just like people don't know what that is. So like say in the context of like what we're doing, I kind of wanted to like keep it within the kind of the realm of like say the stuff that goes on at Palace. So it's like potentially if we did one of these programs, like it could be about like video making, and I could draw upon like, or so say if in the first pilots where I was the person co-facilitating it, there was this like positive psychology workshop side of it that's kind of like psychoeducational. But then what I would bring to it would basically just be like my lived experience and like the people I know from like whatever world this is that I want to like introduce people to. So with the skateboarding stuff, I would get guest speakers to come in and do talks, and like, that would be people like Lev and Gareth that own Palace, and like, my friend Stuart that does all the ads for Palace, and Fergus, who's like the graphic designer that did the logo. And like my friend Chris, who's a pro skater but also a therapist, and just people whose life experience I think is like inspiring, and them just sharing their story is I think something that's like cool for people to hear. And then we would use those talks as like another discussion point and a way to like do the positive psychology work. And then there'd also be another side of it where like me as the co-facilitator, I'd kind of like, you know, pick like outings for us to like, and it, like say in the case of the one where we did like the skateboarding one, it's like the group of people weren't even interested in skateboarding, but it's not like I'm not interested in like getting people skateboarding. I just want to show them like those other kind of like underlying experience of just like the connecting with people and finding that sense of community and basically just finding something that like can branch out in unexpected ways. So it's like we'd go skating, but it's like no one would skate really, maybe apart from like a couple people, and we'd just be like hanging out like at South Bank or whatever and stuff like that. Um, but say in the future, if whoever else that might be like co-facilitating one of these programs, it could go in any direction. Like say, for example, like Victor, if he wanted to co-facilitate one and like do it about rock climbing and share how like rock climbing is like, you know, why that is such a why that's such a big part of his life, and like introduce some of the people that have inspired him in that way. And like um or it could be someone who's like, it could be about photography, it could be about, it could really be about anything. Is kind of like the thought behind it.
Like it's extremely cool, very inspiring. I gotta apologize. I asked that question and made it seem like I was just boiling it all down to boxing because I was super interested in you boxing and showing that to younger people. But I mean, the answer was incredible. It's so much more than I expected. I didn't know it was such a big thing encompassing so many different like facets, but so much cooler hearing you explain it that way. And I'm really really glad you explained. And again, I apologize for asking that as if it was only boxing. It sounds like infinite potential.
I'm actually like, my personal kind of angle on it is quite like the boxing side of it. But also it's like, I guess for good reason, boxing there it is kind of like a cliched sort of like um like foundation sort of thing to do. Like a lot of those things already exist, but I also see the value in that, and it's like um my my sort of participation and experience, a lot of it comes from that angle because that's what I want to be like personally contributing to it. But I'm also want to leave like a lot of space for like whoever wants to get involved with this thing down the road to kind of like shape it in many different ways. Um, but yeah, like the boxing part is definitely like what my a lot of my inspiration comes from that angle.
Well, a lot of the times on here, I just ask really dumb questions, and then the guest has a better answer than the question, and anyone listening learns. So let's pretend that that was the angle for that. I wanted to ask a novice question and have an elaborate answer that explained it further. So we'll pretend that's what happened. Thank you.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I don't, that answer felt totally incoherent from my perspective, but hopefully that's not the case.
So, like the foundation you said was started about 2 years ago, but then obviously it takes a bit for anything to kind of come to fruition. So, like, I guess in your head, what is it like? Not even fully going yet. Like, what you wanted to grow into, it hasn't even got remotely that big yet, right?
Yeah, like it's kind of like for those past couple years, it's totally been in the like development phase. So everything, like I guess at this point we've run about like five different pilot projects, but all of it was leading up to this space that opened up just in the past couple of months. Like, um, like the Manor Place is what it's called, and it opened up in, Halloween. So every it's basically having like the physical space for it is a brand new thing, and that's kind of what it was all leading up to. And then there's also other things like, establishing the charity entity of it is a pretty long-winded process, and like, we've only like right now we just have our application with the charities commission, and that can take like months to sort out, if not like longer. So it's still in this like development phase right now, and that's kind of why I don't have like a really like clear concise way of explaining it, because it's taking on like different sides to it, you know? But I think like ultimately like what my vision for it now that we have the space and it's something that I can like um talk about is like that program thing that I was describing. That's like one side of it, but then I also kind of want to like use my access to this physical space to kind of just do as much stuff as possible that would be, you know, that stuff would be available to like whoever wants to come, whereas like these programs will be they can only accommodate like 12 people at a time. So like the first thing that I've been doing out of the space is like just running free boxing sessions with a friend of mine who's also a boxing coach. And like we're doing that 2 times a week right now. But like I kind of want to expand on that schedule. And then also like my friend Derek, who I do the foundation with, he's a yoga instructor and we're going to start offering free yoga sessions and just kind of have that whole kind of like physical well-being side of it is like a whole other branch that's going to just be like um free and available to whoever wants to come. Um, and then I also see it kind of like branching out in the more kind of like cultural side of things where it's not just like, the physical stuff. Like, I see stuff like even having like a book club or whatever the fuck. Like, I like all that like wholesome community center type stuff. It's kind of like I want to develop all of that really, but it's just a matter of like resources.
I mean, yeah, I doubt you need my accommodations, but that's very commendable because a lot of people I feel would get in a position. I guess not a lot of people would get in a position like Palace, but let's say you build something into something huge. A lot of people wouldn't think about prioritizing giving back to the community and what they can do to like help people access these type of things, especially things that aren't like directly, like you and I can see how all of this fits under the Palace umbrella, but some people might think it should only be skating or whatever. So it's very cool that you guys are all brainstorming ways to give back to all the people that have like kind of helped Palace become what it is. I guess it's a lot of people wouldn't do it, so it's I don't think anyone needs me to respect the ideas of Palace, but I do in this case. It's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess a lot of it, and that's why I found those conversations that you had with like Ben and Joel really inspirational. I, I I don't know, like I think right now we're kind of post that like cool guy bullshit. Um, and it's like right now I think um, you know, that kind of like world that Palace kind of like exists in. It's always been uh a bit like smoke and mirrors, and it's like people really like welcomed into that shit. Like I think all these like brands have always kind of wanted to, it's like cool kids and then like everybody else like isn't. Whereas like I think now there's an opportunity to kind of like really kind of turn that upside down and kind of be more welcoming with everything and kind of, I don't know, like I think it's just like I think there's a bit of a consciousness shift right now that um it just seems ridiculous to kind of like not be on that wave.
Yeah, I agree like 1,000%. I wish more people agreed. It's like the way we're thinking about this. I don't know if everyone, especially in corporations, would think that way, but I agree. I see a shift happening, and I think once people catch up or they catch on to it, it'll be like a thing in the next like 2, 5, 10 years, but it's amazing that you're ahead of it and thinking about ways to like help the community. I don't think enough people do things with other people in mind, so I'm glad you do.
I mean, it's like I'm just hoping. I mean, I think it's a really um like normally in the world of like brands and stuff, it's like you don't want people to like copy what you're doing or whatever. But like this sort of thing feels really good because it's like I hope people copy like anything similar to what we're doing with this. And it does seem like people do want to get behind this sort of stuff. You just got to like take the initiative to make it happen. Cause like even though I like, I can tell with like the stuff that like Ben is doing, like it seems like he's getting help from brands and stuff. And I think when people see it, they'll like want a piece of it. And I think with this type of stuff, I hope it kind of like, I don't know, motivates people if they have similar sort of ideas to just kind of like try to make something happen. And then, if people want to get behind it, then like even better. I mean, people like from that like brand side of things.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I would have never thought about that, but that's like the perfect way to think about it. Like you don't want everything copied, but this is something you want other people to emulate and try to like factor into what they're doing as well. Hopefully that does happen and the world will
Yeah,
have a
it's like
lot.
if somebody is like, or sorry to interrupt you, but it's like, if any other brand is like, yeah, we're gonna like open a community center and like build a skate park there and try to do like public programs, it's like, be my guest, please, like, steal all of these ideas, you know what I mean? It's like, because yeah, I don't really have that like competitive nature in me. So it's like, but with something like this, I'm down. Like it's the first time that something's kind of like ignited like an ambitious side of me. But it's like it's not at all in a competitive spirit. It's like I only want this to grow because of the potential of it like helping people really.
Yeah, no, that absolutely incredible. And then it's funny, Victor would be the perfect one to kind of spearhead the climbing factor if it does get to that.
Yeah, like Victor's already kind of like doing it. Like it was like conversations that him and I had about like this sort of stuff. It was like, we both were just kind of trying to take the initiative of rather than like waiting for, I don't know, to like for someone else to give us the okay to like do it. It's just like you just start doing it and then hopefully people will like want to get behind it. And he's like on that path himself, which is like, stokes me out big time.
Oh, for sure. That I mean, I don't know if that's the right way, but like I was saying before, I think we record. That's what I did do. I mean, comparing a podcast to a real foundation is
No, but it is. I no 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 like I think like what you're doing is definitely on that same wavelength, you know what I mean? And I think like what we were talking about before we started recording about your experience of like, going from the skate shop and like, how those conversations inspired you to start the podcast and like where that's leading you. Like I think all that stuff is super inspiring and I think that's why your podcast is probably like, you know, resonating with people is because it's like you want to have like those types of conversations and there is something like inherently kind of inspiring about it.
well, yeah. I mean, thank you. I would hope. I hope that's what people think of when they listen to this. But like we were also saying, it's kind of up to you can't tell people how to perceive anything, especially something like this. But I'm very flattered that you see because I mean, that is truthfully kind of the point of all this for me. But we'll see.
Yeah, man, I can tell like it shines through from the ones I've listened to.
Thank you very much. You know what? I we talked before. You got someone to be, so I don't want to eat up any more of your day than I agreed I would. I mean, I have a million other things I would like to know, but of course, I would love to keep in touch and talk more about these things. I Yeah, beyond that, before we go, I'll link everything, of course, but just to hear it straight from you, please let anyone listening know where they can find you or the foundation, whatever you want to promote. The mic is yours. Please go ahead.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on, Wesley. It was really a pleasure to talk to you, and I definitely want. Yeah, I feel like I could just like talking to you. But I don't know, I'm useless at promotion, but yeah, there's an Instagram account at Very Powerful Foundation. Working on the website right now. It does exist, but it's just kind of a holding page, but it's verypowerfulfoundation.com. There's a little like promo video thing on there. Um, and yeah, I don't know. Hopefully I'll be able to kind of like package it up uh all a bit better soon so people can get like a clearer idea without listening to me ramble for 45 minutes or whatever.
And sometimes the polished, like being able to articulate what when someone explains to me what they're doing and it's really well worded and it sounds perfect. I almost sometimes think it's maybe too good to be true. So I actually appreciate you. I don't think the way you explained it was bad at all, but I think off the cuff, just trying to like on the spot freestyle what it's about, I think maybe most of the time means a lot more. So I would rather it the way you did it than here in a couple of years once it's gone through all the copywriting and stuff. I like the more authentic, like jumbled one better.
Cool. Well, yeah, I appreciate you giving me the chance to give the jumbled one.
Yeah, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the vacation. I'm glad this is gonna be the first one of the year. So happy New Year to you and anyone listening.
Hell yeah. Happy New Year to you, Wesley. Let's definitely keep in touch.
Yeah, yeah, please do. Thank you for all this and enjoy the rest of the week and month, year, everything.
Likewise.
Cool.
Wicked. Thanks, Wesley. Let's talk soon.
Talk soon. Peace.
Later. Bye.